canoes have been around for thousands of years. Arguably, the first boats ever used by man were simply logs shoved out into the river to help ancient Africans to cross. Then at some later date, the logs were tied together to make a raft, which had the distinct advantage of keeping the passengers out of the water. Then, sometime later, the logs were hollowed out to form dugout canoes, which had the advantage of greatly improved maneuverability. Recently, an 8,000-year-old dugout was found in Nigeria. What is not well known is that dugouts and other primitive boats are still in use in most of the developing world. It is quite likely that there are more of these boats in use than all of the modern aluminum, carbon fiber, and Royalex canoes ever built. Over the past 30 years, I've had the opportunity to spend some time in Asia, Africa, and Central America, where various kinds of dugouts and other primitive boats are still in use. These craft are frequently wonderful examples of the art of boat building using almost no modern tools. I've tried to document these boats and occasionally have also attempted to paddle them. The design of these particular dugouts, which the Belizeans call dories, retain the rounded bottom of the original tree, and as a result, the boat feels extremely unstable to us. Eventually, we were only able to paddle this boat standing up for a few yards. What is really surprising about our mostly unsuccessful attempts to paddle this boat is that it was paddled 26 miles from the mainland by a fisherman who probably paddled most of the way standing up. The Creole fishing village of Monkey River on the coast in southern Belize is one of my favorite towns. It is only accessible by boat. The dugouts they build in Monkey River have some of the finest workmanship I have ever seen. The sharp water entry lines, modified V-hull, and rocker rival some of our modern designs. The inlaid stems, deck plates, and gunnels are evidence of fine craftsmanship. Unfortunately, Monkey River was almost completely destroyed during Hurricane Iris in 2001 and is slowly being rebuilt. On the mainland of southern Belize in the town of Punta Gorda, we encountered these larger dugouts. The lower section is the original dugout, which has been spread and braced, while the upper sections are closely fitted boards, braced and reinforced with ribs. The square stern can support a small fisherman's outboard. As we prepared to paddle the Zambezi in 1999, our guides told us that they would only allow 5 canoes at a time to go down the river, and that was because when you came upon a pod of hippos, which are actually the most dangerous animals in Africa, the hippos would go underwater, and they could stay down for only 15 minutes, which is about how long it takes for 5 canoes to pass, and you certainly didn't want hippos coming up in the middle of your canoes because they like to bite them in half. At that point, I decided that traveling in groups of 3 might make more sense. Being in boats about 20 yards from a herd of 30 or 40 elephants is an experience that will never be forgotten. The elephants knew we were there, but were much more interested in bathing. Malawi is one of the poorest countries in the world, but surprisingly, it has some of the most welcoming people I have ever met. In 1999, and again in 2001, we had an opportunity to visit the village of Salima on Lake Malawi. One of the main sources of food for the village is fish. The village spends a great deal of time fishing and preserving fish for sale on local markets. The boats they use are either large hand-built dories requiring 6 or more paddlers, or small solo dugouts. We had an opportunity to see some of the finishing touches put on one of the dugouts, which retain much of the original shape of the log but have long, narrow openings. Most of these dugouts were also equipped with a crosspiece in the bow, which is used to hang a lantern used to attract fish at night. These dugouts require a great deal of skill to paddle. The Potala Palace, which dominates the city of Lhasa, is one of the most beautiful buildings in the world. Until the 1959 invasion of Tibet by the Chinese, the Potala was the seat of Tibetan government and the home of the Dalai Lama, who lived there for a number of years until forced into exile in India. In many parts of the world, large trees were not available, so other types of boats were developed. Coracles date back thousands of years, and are boats made of animal skins stretched over a frame. Coracles can still be seen in the British Isles, India, and Tibet. In Lhasa, in 1987, we had an opportunity to cross the Lhasa River in a couple of coracles, which they call yak boats, since the skins of 2 or 3 yaks are used to make the boats. When Karma, our guide, contracted with a ferryman to take us across the river and back, we thought that we would be the only ones in the yak boats. Then a long line of people arrived, and we were quite surprised to find that these fragile-seeming boats could carry up to 10 people and a fair amount of cargo. Almost 20 years later, from the perspective of a canoe instructor and safety advocate, I cringe on viewing this video of our return back across the river. The water is very cold, high, and fast. Developing countries have not heard much about life preservers or water safety, and a swim in this water would have meant total disaster. Notice the extreme attention to detail. The boats are propelled with long oars in a manner somewhat similar to our modern oar rafts, and the skins are sewn together in such a way that the boats remained absolutely dry. Lanyu or Orchid Island, is the home of the Ami tribe, one of the 9 surviving Malayo-Polynesian indigenous tribes of Taiwan. Unfortunately, at the time we were there, I did not have a video camera, but at least this picture gives some idea of the wonderful carved figures and decorations on this canoe. The extremely high bow and stern allow this partial dugout to be rowed into 7 and 8 foot waves. Zanzibar. The name evokes images of exotic spices, sultans' palaces, African and Arabic traders, and slavery, all of which played a role in the history of this island off the coast of Tanzania. Nowadays, Zanzibar is a major tourist destination with its fascinating Arabic architecture and largely Muslim population. And it also has some of the most pristine white sand beaches on the Indian Ocean. Since fishing is a major occupation, there are a tremendous variety of dugouts and dhows. Because dugouts tend to be unstable in wind and waves, many of them have outriggers, which make them much more stable. In addition, many of the dugouts have sails and are called dhows. There's a large fishing village on the end of the island called Nungwe, which has become a major tourist destination because of its miles of beach and clear water. Besides a large fleet of fishing dugouts and dhows, the village has a very active boat building industry. Frequently, boats are raised up on the beach, and a small fire is started under the hull, designed to remove whatever gross may have accumulated. Since the hull is saturated with water, it does not burn. In 2001, we were privileged to spend some time on a fishing dhow with its crew. 30 or 40 of these boats can be seen heading out to sea whenever the weather permits. Poles are used to move the boat out of the island's wind shadow, where the sail can be raised. I was allowed to pole and steer the boat. On our way out to sea, we were overtaken by this small dugout which left us like we were standing still. One of my most memorable experiences in Africa occurred in 1998 when we were poled into the Okavango Delta. The delta has been designated as a National Heritage Site. It consists of thousands of miles of creeks, streams, and lagoons created by the Okavango River as it empties into a large flat plain. The delta ends in a series of huge flat salt pans created by evaporation. The unique environment of the delta is seriously threatened by a proposal to create a series of power dams on the Okavango. For thousands of years, people have lived and fished in the delta. They developed wide, flat makoros, which are propelled by using 10-foot poles. In recent years, many of the delta's people have stopped fishing in favor of pulling people into the delta. The slow, deliberate pace allows time to appreciate the incredible plant and animal diversity. I was able to pull an unloaded makoro about 2 miles and had a great time. Our campsite in the delta consisted of a grove of trees surrounded by an open area. Elephants were frequently just a few yards away, and at night lions and hyenas could be heard. The campsite was named Buffalo Camp by our guides because 2 years before our visit, one of their clients disregarded orders and walked out of the campsite to urinate at night. He was killed by a Cape buffalo. This kind of thing is extremely rare, but does happen. Each evening, we were poled a mile or two up to a small lagoon to watch the sunset. On this evening, we had to hurriedly turn back because some hippos started swimming toward our boats. The land in the delta supports one of the most concentrated groups of animals in Africa. On one of our game drives, we could count 15 species of large mammals from one spot. This cheetah is still breathing hard and has just made a kill of a warthog. Cheetahs must eat their kill quickly because they are unable to defend them from other predators like lions and hyenas. While hiking one day, we came upon a group of men who were in the process of making a dugout makoro. They were located a mile or so from any water, and were doing the initial roughing out with an axe preliminary to skidding the boat to the water. We quickly found out how much work it was to build a boat like this. Unfortunately, the days of traditional makoros are almost over, since the number of 300-year-old sausage trees is rapidly being depleted. The t-shirt is evidence of the huge market in used clothing, which is the largest export to Africa from both the US and Europe. Once a Mokoro is roughed out and skidded to the water, it will be floated down to this spot for its final curing and shaping. You'll note the new boat, which is being cured in the water. It has temporary braces to hold its shape until the boat hardens. In 1999, I paddled about 40 miles on Lake Victoria near Kisumu, Kenya, in a tandem full boat. Titus, my guide, took me to some places where very few white people ever go. As we paddled, we were able to get close to some fishermen as they retrieved their nets. And then we stopped at a fishing village where the boat became a major attraction. These people, living less than 10 miles from the second largest city in Kenya, almost never leave their village. About noon, we paddled up a small river. Titus claimed that no other white man had ever been there. Be that as it may, about a mile or so upstream, we came to a place where illegal corn liquor was being made, and everyone was already obviously drunk. It soon became clear that it was not a good idea for us to be there, so we turned around and paddled quickly back to the lake. In the U.S., we are used to lake shores dotted with homes and cottages, where you rarely see people. In Africa, lake shores are an intimate part of everyday life. People fish in, bathe in, and drink the lake. Lakes in Africa also tend to not be as benign as our lakes. Paddlers need to be aware of the possibility of running into hippos and crocodiles, and significant parts of Lake Victoria are contaminated with schistosomiasis. Okay, these are not primitive boats, but they were very intriguing, not to mention that they look like something directly out of the Flintstones. Like primitive boats, these scooters are an ingenious solution to a transportation problem, and I was fascinated. Lake Manyonyi in southern Uganda is a huge water-filled volcanic crater. The scenery is spectacular. The lake is the home of rare lake otters and is the site of an Idi Amin era ruined mansion, which, depending on who you talk to, may or may not have actually belonged to him. The Mokoros here are actually made from non-native eucalyptus trees, which were imported to Africa because of the need for fast-growing trees, and are now in danger of shading out many native species. North America is not the only place in the world that has problems with introduced and invader species getting out of hand. We leave you with the orphans of Kisoro, Uganda. Many of these children have been orphaned by the AIDS epidemic.